The billionaire he swore he didn't love until she made him break every one of her rules. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. The Boston skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the evening sky, but Alexander Hayes barely noticed it from his corner office on the 40th floor of Hayes Tower. His attention was fixed on the quarterly reports spread across his mahogany desk, each page representing another victory in his relentless pursuit of success. At 42, he had built his tech empire from the ground up, transforming a small startup into a multi-billion-dollar corporation through sheer determination and one unbreakable rule: never let emotions cloud your judgment. The intercom buzzed, interrupting his concentration. "Mr. Hayes, the new head of creative development is here for the meeting." Alexander glanced at his watch. 6:55 p.m. 5 minutes early. He appreciated punctuality. "Send them in." The door opened, and his carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. Claire Bennett strode in with confident steps, her auburn hair catching the last rays of sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She wore a simple navy blazer over a white blouse, but carried herself with a kind of self-assured grace that made even the most expensive designer clothes seem superficial in comparison. "Mr. Hayes," she said, extending her hand, "thank you for taking the time to meet with me personally." Her handshake was firm, professional, but there was something in her green eyes that challenged him, a spark of defiance that suggested she saw right through his carefully crafted facade. Alexander withdrew his hand quickly, ignoring the lingering warmth of her touch. "Ms. Bennett, your portfolio is impressive, but I have concerns about your approach to our upcoming product launch." He gestured to the chair across from his desk, maintaining the professional distance that had served him so well over the years. Claire sat down, crossing her legs with deliberate slowness. "You mean my suggestion to focus on emotional connection rather than technical specifications?" A slight smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Tell me, Mr. Hayes, when was the last time someone bought a product because they admired its processing power rather than how it made them feel?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Emotion is unreliable. Numbers don't lie." "No, but they don't tell the whole truth either." Claire leaned forward, her passion evident in every word. "Your company has created something revolutionary, technology that could genuinely improve people's lives. But you're so focused on the mechanics that you're missing the human element. People don't just want innovation. They want innovation that speaks to their hearts. Hearts don't drive profit margins, Ms. Bennett." "No?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a tablet, quickly pulling up a presentation. "These numbers suggest otherwise. Companies that connect emotionally with their customers show an average growth rate 3 times higher than their competitors." Alexander studied the data, irritated by its accuracy, and even more irritated by the way Claire's presence seemed to fill the room, making it harder to concentrate. She was different from the usual yes-men who populated his corporate world, different from anyone he'd met in years. "An interesting theory," he said finally, keeping his voice neutral, "but I didn't build this company on theories." "No, you built it on rules." Claire stood up, gathering her things. "The question is, Mr. Hayes, are you sure those rules are still serving you, or are they just keeping you safe?" The words hit too close to home, stirring memories he'd worked hard to bury. Alexander rose from his chair, his height allowing him to tower over her. "My rules have made me very successful, Ms. Bennett." "Successful, yes." She met his gaze without flinching. "But are you happy?" Before he could respond, she was walking toward the door, pausing only briefly to look back over her shoulder. "I'll have the revised proposal on your desk tomorrow morning. And Mr. Hayes, sometimes the greatest success comes from breaking our own rules. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Alexander alone with the disturbing realization that for the first time in years, he wasn't entirely in control. He turned to the window, watching the city lights blur into a constellation of artificial stars. Claire Bennett was dangerous, not because she challenged his business decisions, but because she made him question everything else. He pulled out his phone, firing off a quick text to his assistant. Schedule a meeting with HR tomorrow. Discuss alternative candidates for creative development. The response came immediately. Ms. Bennett's contract is already signed and approved by the board, effective immediately. Alexander's fingers tightened around the phone. One meeting, and she'd already broken his first rule. Never let anyone get under your skin. As he stared at the city below, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. His carefully ordered world was about to become very complicated indeed. 2 weeks had passed since Claire Bennett invaded Alexander's carefully ordered world, and she'd spent every moment since then systematically dismantling his comfortable routine. The morning marketing meeting was just another example of her disruptive influence. With all due respect, Mr. Hayes, Claire's voice carried across the conference room, launching a tech product on Black Friday is exactly what every other company will be doing. We need to stand out, not blend in. Alexander leaned back in his chair at the head of the table, watching as other executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one challenged him like this. No one except her. And your alternative suggestion? Thanksgiving morning. Claire stood, commanding the room with natural authority. While other companies fight over doorbusters, we launch a campaign about connection, about bringing families together through technology. We show real people using our products to share real moments. Sentiment doesn't sell products, Alexander countered. But even as he said it, he could see heads nodding around the table. Claire's lips curved into a knowing smile. Really? Tell that to every major brand that runs holiday commercials about family and love. They understand what you refuse to acknowledge. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. The room fell silent, waiting for his response. Alexander studied Claire, noting the flush in her cheeks, the passionate gleam in her eyes. She was beautiful when she fought for what she believed in, a dangerous observation he quickly pushed aside. Fine, he conceded, surprising everyone, including himself. Draft a proposal, but I want data to support this strategy, not just feelings. You'll have both on your desk by tomorrow morning. Claire gathered her materials, then paused. Oh, and don't forget about the charity gala tonight. The board expects both of us to attend. Alexander had forgotten, and the reminder irritated him. I have work to do. The work will still be here tomorrow. Claire's voice softened slightly. Sometimes the most important business happens outside the office, Mr. Hayes. After the meeting dispersed, Alexander retreated to his office, but concentration eluded him. The charity gala meant small talk, forced socializing, and worst of all, dancing. He loosened his tie, feeling trapped by obligations he couldn't escape. The evening arrived too quickly. Alexander stood at the entrance of the Grand Plaza Hotel, adjusting his bow tie and steeling himself for the social performance ahead. Then he saw her. Claire descended the hotel's marble staircase in a deep burgundy gown that caught the light with every movement. Her hair was swept up, revealing the elegant line of her neck, and for a moment, Alexander forgot how to breathe. Mr. Hayes, she greeted him with a small nod. I'm glad you decided to come. The board didn't leave me much choice. He offered his arm automatically, a gesture of corporate courtesy. Shall we? The ballroom was a swirl of Boston's elite, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over the gathering. Alexander guided Claire through the crowd, hyper-aware of her hand resting lightly on his arm. They made their way through the expected greetings and small talk, and he noticed how effortlessly she charmed everyone they encountered. More surprisingly, he found himself actually enjoying the evening. "Dance with me," Claire said suddenly, as the orchestra began a waltz. "I don't dance," Alexander replied automatically. "Another rule?" She raised an eyebrow. "Or are you afraid?" The challenge in her voice sparked something in him. Pride, defiance, or perhaps something deeper he wasn't ready to acknowledge. Without a word, he led her to the dance floor. They moved together with unexpected grace, and Alexander found himself pulling her closer than strictly necessary. The scent of her perfume, subtle and intoxicating, made it hard to maintain his usual emotional distance. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Hayes," Claire murmured, looking up at him through long lashes. "You dance beautifully for someone who claims not to. There are many things you don't know about me, Ms. Bennett, but I'd like to." Her words were soft, almost lost in the music. "If you'd let me." The vulnerability in her voice caught him off guard, and for a moment his carefully constructed walls wavered. Then he remembered why those walls existed in the first place. The memory of Rebecca's betrayal, still sharp after all these years, cut through the moment like a blade. Alexander stepped back abruptly, breaking their connection. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Bennett. I should go check on our major donors." He walked away before she could respond, missing the hurt that flashed across her face. At the bar, he ordered a scotch and tried to ignore the emptiness in his arms where she had been moments before. What he didn't see was Nathan Carter watching from across the room, a calculating smile playing on his lips as he observed the interaction. Nathan raised his glass in a mock toast, his eyes cold with anticipation. The game was about to become much more interesting. Rain lashed against the windows of Hayes Tower, turning Boston into a blur of grey shadows. Alexander sat in his darkened office, tie loosened, sleeve rolled up, staring at the storm outside. The quarterly report he'd been reviewing lay forgotten on his desk, his mind stuck on the way Claire had looked at him before he walked away at the gala 3 nights ago. A knock on his door broke through his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting his assistant with the evening's messages. Instead, Claire entered, carrying a stack of folders and a determined expression. Her hair was damp from the rain, and her cheeks were flushed from what he assumed was her usual rapid pace through the office. Something about her slightly disheveled appearance made her even more appealing, a dangerous thought he immediately suppressed. "The Thanksgiving campaign proposal," she said, placing the folders on his desk, "complete with market research, focus group results, and projected ROI analyses." Alexander picked up the top folder, more to have something to do with his hands than out of immediate interest. "You could have had your assistant deliver these." "I could have." Claire settled into the chair across from him, showing no sign of leaving. "But then I wouldn't have the chance to ask why you've been avoiding me since the gala." "I haven't been avoiding you," he replied automatically. Though they both knew it was a lie, he'd rescheduled 2 meetings and delegated another to his VP of marketing. "Right." Claire leaned forward, her green eyes intent on his face. "And I suppose you always work in the dark." Alexander reached for the desk lamp, but Claire's hand caught his wrist. The touch sent an electric current through his arm, and he jerked away, as if burned. "Don't," she said softly. "Sometimes it's easier to be honest in the dark." The rain drummed against the windows, filling the silence between them. Alexander stood, needing to put physical distance between them. "Miss Bennett." "Claire," she interrupted. "After that dance, I think you can call me Claire." He turned to face the window, watching water cascade down the glass. "That dance shouldn't have happened. But it did. And you felt something. Don't try to deny it. What I feel or don't feel is irrelevant." His voice was tight with controlled emotion. "We have a professional relationship, nothing more." Claire's laugh was soft and bitter. "Is that another one of your rules? Keep everything professional? Never let anyone close enough to matter?" My rules exist for a reason. Then tell me the reason. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could smell the light floral scent of her shampoo. What are you so afraid of, Alexander? The use of his first name broke something loose inside him. He turned to face her, and suddenly they were too close, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. You want to know what I'm afraid of? His voice was low, intense. I'm afraid of people who think they can walk into my life and change everything, who think they understand me after a few weeks of meetings and one dance. I don't claim to understand everything about you, Claire countered, holding her ground. But I understand enough to know you're hiding behind those rules because it's easier than risking something real. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating her face for a moment. Alexander saw the challenge in her eyes, but also something softer, an invitation he wasn't sure he could refuse much longer. You don't know what you're asking for, he warned. Then show me. She stepped closer, erasing the last bit of safe distance between them. Show me why you're so convinced that keeping people at arm's length is the only way to live. Maybe it was the storm, or the lateness of the hour, or simply the way she looked at him, like she could see past every barrier he'd ever built. Whatever the reason, Alexander found himself breaking his own rules. His hand came up to cup her, face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. Claire's breath caught, her lips parting slightly. For one endless moment, the world narrowed to just this. The warmth of her skin under his palm, the sound of rain against glass, the magnetic pull drawing them closer. Then his phone buzzed sharply on the desk, shattering the moment. The caller. ID displayed Nathan Carter, and reality came crashing back. Alexander dropped his hand and stepped back, his expression closing off. You should go. Alexander, please. The word was both command and plea. Just go. Claire gathered her things slowly, as if giving him time to change his mind. At the door, she paused. You can't keep running forever. I'm not running, he said. But the words rang hollow even to his own ears. I'm protecting us both. After she left, Alexander finally answered his phone. What do you want, Nathan? Just checking in on an old friend. Nathan's voice oozed false concern. Tell me, does your new creative director know about what happened to Rebecca? About your role in her downfall? Alexander's hand tightened on the phone. Stay away from Claire. Or what? Nathan chuckled darkly. You'll ruin her career too. Some patterns are hard to break, aren't they? The line went dead, leaving Alexander alone with his demons. He looked out at the storm, remembering the warmth of Claire's skin under his fingers, knowing he had to find a way to keep his distance before history repeated itself in the worst possible way. The Thanksgiving campaign launch was 3 weeks away, and Alexander hadn't been alone with Claire since that rainy night in his office. He'd made sure of it, surrounding himself with executives and assistants, keeping every interaction strictly professional. But he couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd felt under his touch, or the hint of disappointment in her eyes every time he deliberately put distance between them. Today's executive meeting wasn't making things any easier. Claire stood at the front of the conference room, presenting the final campaign details with the kind of passion that made everyone lean forward in their seats. The focus groups responded overwhelmingly positively, she explained, clicking through slides that showed families connecting through Hayes Technology's latest innovation. 92% said they would be more likely to purchase after seeing these ads. And the production costs? Alexander kept his voice neutral, professional. Higher than a traditional campaign, Claire admitted. But the projected return is still theoretical. He cut her off, ignoring the flash of hurt in her eyes. We're not a charity, Ms. Bennett, we're a business. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Everyone knew the campaign had already been approved. This meeting was supposed to be a final review, not a debate. Claire squared her shoulders. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Mr. Hayes. There's nothing to discuss. Make the budget. Cuts, I recommended, or we'll go with our original Black Friday strategy. He expected her to back down. Instead, she gathered her materials with deliberate calm and walked to the door. Actually, there is something to discuss. Your office, now. Before he could respond, she was already walking down the hallway. The other executives studied their laptops with sudden intensity, avoiding his gaze. Alexander stood, straightening his tie. Meeting adjourned. He found Claire pacing in his office, her professional composure cracking. When he closed the door, she whirled to face him. This isn't about the campaign budget, is it? Her voice trembled with barely contained emotion. This is about what almost happened between us. This is about business decisions. Stop lying. She stepped closer, and he could see tears of frustration in her eyes. You've been sabotaging my work for weeks because you're afraid of your own feelings. I don't mix business with pleasure, Ms. Bennett. No, you don't mix anything with anything. You just hide behind your rules and your walls, pushing away anyone who might actually care about you. Her words hit too close to home, and Alexander felt his own control slipping. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? But Claire moved even closer, forcing him to look at her. I've watched you these past weeks. You work 18-hour days. You live alone in that massive penthouse. You don't have a single personal photo in your office. You're so afraid of getting hurt that you've stopped living altogether. And you think you're the one to fix that? His voice was harsh with suppressed emotion. To save the broken billionaire with the power of love? I don't want to fix you, Alexander. Her voice softened. I just want you to stop fixing yourself into this perfect, empty mold. He turned away, but she caught his arm, her touch sending familiar electricity through him. Tell me about Rebecca. Alexander froze. How do you... Nathan Carter cornered me at lunch yesterday. He seemed very interested in sharing stories about your past. Claire's grip tightened slightly. He said, you destroyed her career, her life. I don't believe him, but I need to hear your side. The mention of Nathan's name snapped something inside Alexander. He pulled away from Claire's touch, anger and old pain mixing dangerously in his chest. You want to know my side? Fine. Rebecca was my fiancée and my company's CFO. She was also stealing millions from our investors and funneling it through offshore accounts. Claire's eyes widened. What happened? I turned her in, testified against her. His laugh was bitter. She claimed I set her up because she threatened to leave me. Nathan backed her story. He was her lover, though I didn't know it then. The charges didn't stick, but her reputation was ruined. She lost everything. And you blame yourself. I trusted her. I loved her. The words felt like glass in his throat. And in the end, that love blinded me to what was happening right under my nose. It made me weak. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached up, touching his face with gentle fingers. Love didn't make you weak, Alexander. It made you strong enough to do the right thing, even though it hurt. He caught her hand, intending to push it away, but instead found himself holding it against his chest. He could feel his heartbeat under her palm, racing with emotions he'd kept locked away for years. I can't, he whispered, but he didn't let go of her hand. Can't or won't. Claire stepped closer until he could feel the warmth of her body against his, because there's a difference. The air between them crackled with tension. Alexander knew he should step back, maintain professional distance, follow all the rules that had kept him safe for so long. Instead, he found himself lowering his head, drawn by the magnetic pull of her presence. Their lips were inches apart when his office door burst open. Nathan Carter stood in the doorway, a predatory smile on his face. Sorry to interrupt, he drawled. But I thought you'd want to know. The board's calling an emergency meeting. Seems someone leaked details about your Thanksgiving campaign to your biggest competitor. They're launching the exact same concept, 2 weeks before you. Claire stepped back, her face pale. That's impossible. Only the executive team had access to those plans. Nathan's smile widened. Funny how history repeats itself, isn't it? Alexander, always falling for women who end up betraying you. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Alexander looked at Claire, seeing the horror in her eyes, and felt his wall slam back into place. "Get out," he said, his voice arctic. "Both of you. Alexander, you can't think I—" "Out!" Claire left first, her back straight but her hands shaking. Nathan lingered in the doorway. "Just trying to help, old friend. After all, some lessons need to be learned twice." A day after they were gone, Alexander stared out at the Boston skyline, feeling the familiar coldness settle over him. He'd been right all along. Love was a weakness he couldn't afford. What he didn't see was Nathan watching Claire from the hallway, slipping a USB drive back into his pocket with a satisfied smirk. The boardroom felt like a war zone. 2 weeks had passed since Nathan's revelation, and the emergency meetings had become a daily occurrence. Alexander sat at the head of the table, his face an expressionless mask as he listened to the latest damage reports. "Our competitor's campaign launches next week," the marketing VP explained, his voice strained. "Early focus groups show their message resonating even stronger than ours did. They're being hailed as innovative, forward-thinking, everything we wanted to be." Alexander's gaze flickered to Claire's empty chair. She hadn't been invited to these meetings since the leak. Though no formal accusations had been made, the investigation was ongoing, but he'd already made up his mind. The timing was too convenient, the betrayal too familiar. "Mr. Hayes," his assistant appeared at the door. "Ms. Bennett is asking to see you. She says it's urgent. Tell her I'm in meetings all day." The same response he'd given for 2 weeks. The room cleared quickly, executives hurrying to avoid the tension that had permeated the company since the leak. Alexander remained seated, staring at the presentation still displayed on the screen. His competitor's campaign, nearly identical to the one Claire had created. "You can't avoid me forever." He looked up to find Claire standing in the doorway. She looked different, paler, with dark circles under her eyes that her makeup couldn't quite hide. Something else was different too, but he couldn't put his finger on it. "I believe I made myself clear about unauthorized interruptions," he said coldly. Claire closed the door behind her and walked to the table. "The investigation cleared me 3 days ago. But you wouldn't know that, would you? Because you're too busy hiding in here, assuming the worst about me. The investigation was inconclusive." "No, it wasn't." She slapped a folder onto the table. "They traced the leak to a security breach in the executive server, a breach that happened from Nathan Carter's private IP address. It's all there, in black and white, but you haven't even looked at the report, have you?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Nathan has no access to our servers. He did when you were partners. Did you ever change the backdoor access codes after he left?" When Alexander's expression flickered, she pressed on. "Of course not, because that would mean admitting he betrayed you too, not just Rebecca." "Enough." Alexander stood, using his height to intimidate, but Claire didn't back down. "No, not enough. You want to know why Nathan did this? Because he knew exactly how you'd react. He knew you'd push me away without a second thought, just like you push away anyone who gets too close. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Claire's voice cracked slightly. "I understand that you'd rather believe I betrayed you than face the possibility that you might actually care about me." The words hung between them, heavy, with truth. Alexander turned away, moving to the window. "It doesn't matter now. The campaign is ruined. The board is calling for changes in leadership. And my company—" "Your company?" "Adore," Claire laughed bitterly. That's all you care about, isn't it? Your precious company, your control, your rules. Well, congratulations. You've protected yourself from everything that matters. She swayed slightly, pressing a hand to her forehead. Alexander noticed and took an involuntary step toward her, old instincts warring with new walls. Are you all right? Don't pretend to care now. She steadied herself against the table. I came here to tell you I'm resigning. The words hit him harder than he expected. Claire, I'm done fighting for someone who won't fight for themselves. She straightened up, but he could see the effort it took. I deserve better than this, Alexander. I deserve someone who's brave enough to love me back. She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Oh, and one more thing. Remember that night in your office, during the storm? Her hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach, but Alexander was too focused on her words to notice. You asked what I was afraid of. The truth is, I was only afraid of one thing, that you'd prove me wrong about you. Congratulations on that, too. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that somehow hurt more than a slam would have. Alexander stood alone in the boardroom, the evidence of Nathan's betrayal untouched on the table, the ghost of possibilities slipping away with each of Claire's retreating steps. His phone buzzed. Nathan again. He'd been calling daily, probably to gloat. This time, Alexander answered. I hope you're happy, he said, his voice lethal. Oh, I am. Nathan's smugness carried clearly through the line. But the real question is, are you? Was protecting yourself worth losing the only person who actually believed in you? Alexander hung up, but the question echoed in his mind. Through the boardroom windows, he watched Claire cross the lobby far below. She stopped at the security desk to turn in her badge, and even from 40 floors up, he could see the proud set of her shoulders, the dignity with which she walked away. Something inside him screamed to go after her, to read the report, to fix what Nathan had broken. But his feet remained frozen, his walls stayed up, and his heart, the heart she'd almost reached, retreated behind its familiar shields. What he didn't see was Claire stopping outside the building, one hand pressed to her stomach where their future was already growing, twin heartbeats too faint yet to hear, but strong enough to change everything. If only he'd been brave enough to listen. Claire sat in her doctor's office, staring at the ultrasound screen with a mixture of wonder and terror. Two distinct heartbeats pulsed in perfect rhythm, the sound filling the small room like a drum orchestra. Twins, Dr. Rodriguez confirmed with a warm smile. Both looking perfectly healthy at 12 weeks. Would you like to know the gender? No, Claire whispered, her hand trembling as she touched the screen. Not yet, not alone. The doctor's expression softened with understanding. The father isn't involved. He doesn't know. Claire wiped away an unexpected tear. And I'm not sure he should. After the appointment, Claire walked through the crisp December afternoon, her mind racing with implications. The Boston Common stretched out before her, trees bare against the winter sky, reminding her of countless lunch breaks spent here during her time at Hayes Tower. She could see the building now, its gleaming spire piercing the clouds like a modern fortress. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister Olivia. How did it go? Come over, I have ice cream and tissues ready. An hour later, Claire sat curled on Olivia's couch, a pint of mint chocolate chip melting untouched beside her. I don't know what to do, Liv. I can't go back to him, not after everything, but these babies, they deserve to know their father. Their father deserves to know them too, Olivia said gently, even if he is an emotionally constipated billionaire with trust issues. You don't understand. You didn't see his face when he thought I'd betrayed him. He didn't even read the investigation report. He just shut down, shut me out. Claire's hand drifted to her still flat stomach. I can't put these babies through that kind of conditional love. Have you seen the news lately? Olivia grabbed her tablet, pulling up a business article. Hayes Technologies stock is down 30%. The Thanksgiving campaign disaster hit them hard. Rumor has it Alexander hasn't left his office in weeks. Claire took the tablet, scanning the article. There was a photo of Alexander leaving a board meeting, and her heart clenched. He looked thinner, harder, the shadows under his eyes matching the ones she saw in her own mirror every morning. "He's hurting too," Olivia observed. "Good." But Claire's voice lacked conviction. "Maybe he'll learn something from it. Or maybe he'll just build his walls higher." Olivia took her sister's hand. "Claire, I love you, and I'll support whatever you decide. But are you sure you're not doing exactly what he does, letting fear make your decisions?" Before Claire could respond, her phone lit up with an incoming call. The number was blocked, but something made her answer. "Hello? Ms. Bennett." Nathan Carter's voice slithered through the speaker. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Claire's blood ran cold. "How did you get this number?" "I have my ways, just like I have ways of knowing about your interesting doctors. Appointment today. Twins, was it? Congratulations." Olivia saw her sister's face pale and grabbed the phone, putting it on speaker. "What do you want, Nathan?" Claire demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just looking out for old friends. I'd hate for this kind of news to reach the board through unofficial channels. You know how rumors can damage a company's reputation. A CEO with a secret love child. Or two, in this case. Are you threatening me?" Nathan's laugh was cold. "Think of it as insurance. Stay away from Alexander, keep your little secret, and everyone wins. Try to tell him, and well," he paused for effect, "let's just say the board already has doubts about his leadership. This kind of scandal might be the final straw." The line went dead. Claire stared at the phone, her hands shaking. "He must have someone at the doctor's office, or he's been having me followed. I can't breathe." Olivia wrapped her arms around her sister. "We'll figure this out. Nathan Carter doesn't get to win." "But he already has." Claire looked out the window at the darkening sky. "If I tell Alexander about the babies, Nathan will twist it into another betrayal. The board will think I'm trying to manipulate their CEO. Alexander will assume the worst, just like he did with the campaign." Her laugh was hollow. "And the worst part of me still loves him, even after everything." "Then fight for him," Olivia urged. "Show him the truth about Nathan. Make him see." "No." Claire stood, her decision crystallizing. "I'm done fighting battles for someone who won't fight for themselves. These babies deserve better than that. I deserve better." She touched her stomach, feeling a flutter that might have been movement or might have been fear. "I'm moving back to Chicago. The digital marketing firm there still wants me. I can start over, raise these babies somewhere Alexander Hayes can't hurt them. And if he finds out someday." Claire moved to the window, watching the first snowflakes of winter dance against the glass. In the distance, Hayes Tower stood illuminated against the night sky, every window blazing with light. She imagined Alexander up there, alone in his office, surrounded by the empire he'd chosen over love. Then he'll have to decide what matters more, his rules or his children. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. "But I won't hold my breath waiting for him to choose right." What she couldn't see was Alexander at that very moment, standing in his own office, holding the investigation report he'd finally read. His phone displayed a draft text to Claire that he'd written and deleted a dozen times. "I'm sorry I was wrong. Please come back." But like all the others before it, this message too went unsent. Another casualty of pride and fear and walls built too high to scale. 3 months had passed since Claire left Boston, but her absence echoed through Hayes Tower like a ghost. Alexander noticed it in the smallest things, the way junior executives no longer lingered excitedly after meetings, the sterile professionalism, that had replaced the warmth she'd brought to the company culture, the coffee cart in the lobby where she used to greet everyone by name. "The Q1 numbers are in," his CFO reported, sliding a folder across his desk. "We're down 15% from last year." Alexander barely heard him. His attention had caught on a magazine left on the corner of his desk, some Chicago business publication. The cover featured an article about innovative marketing strategies, and there she was, Claire Bennett, named as the new creative director at Midwest Digital, already making waves in the industry. She looked different in the photo. Her smile was the same, but there was something else, a glow about her that he couldn't quite place. She wore a loose-fitting blazer, her hand resting casually across her midsection in a way that... "Mr. Hayes," the CFO cleared his throat. "About the numbers. Schedule a board meeting for tomorrow." Alexander's voice was distant. "And get me everything you can find about Nathan Carter's recent activities, financial records, business dealings, everything." After the CFO left, Alexander stared at Claire's photo, remembering the investigation report he'd finally read too. Late. The evidence of Nathan's manipulation had been clear, documented in meticulous detail. But pride and fear had kept him from reaching out, from admitting he'd been wrong. His phone buzzed, Nathan right on schedule. He'd been calling weekly, each conversation a careful dance of implied threats and old grievances. This time, Alexander answered with a new purpose. "I know what you did," he said without preamble. "With the campaign leak, with Rebecca, all of it. Took you long enough." Nathan's smugness crackled through the line. "Tell me, how's the company doing without your precious creative director? Stock price holding steady?" "Why did you do it?" "Because I could." Nathan's voice hardened. "Because watching you build walls around yourself, pushing away anyone who might actually care about you, it's been the best revenge I could have hoped for. You're so afraid of betrayal that you betray yourself." "You're finished, Nathan. I'm taking everything you have." "Are you?" Nathan's laugh was cold. "Better be careful, Alexander. You start digging, you might find things you're not ready to know. Like why Claire really left Boston." The call ended, leaving Alexander with a growing sense of unease. He pulled up his email, finding the last message he'd drafted to Claire months ago, but never sent. The cursor blinked accusingly at him. Across the city, in his penthouse office, Nathan Carter watched the snow fall over Boston. His phone displayed a recent surveillance photo of Claire in Chicago, her pregnancy now visible despite her careful wardrobe choices. "Not yet, old friend," he murmured. "Let's see how much more you can lose before the truth breaks you completely." Back at Hayes Tower, Alexander finally hit send on the email he'd been holding onto for 3 months. "Claire, I was wrong. About everything. The investigation cleared you, and I was too stubborn, too afraid to admit it. Nathan manipulated us both, just like he did with Rebecca. I see that now. I know an apology isn't enough. I know I hurt you in ways that maybe can't be fixed, but I miss you. Not just at work, though the company feels empty without your vision, but in all the ways that matter. You were right about me, about my walls, my rules, my fear of letting anyone close. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even asking for a response. I just needed you to know that you changed me, even if I realized it too late. Alexander." The email bounced back immediately. Address no longer in service. In Chicago, Claire sat in her new office, watching similar snow fall over a different city. Her hand rested on her now prominent baby bump, feeling the twins move. She'd chosen not to learn their genders, but she could sense their distinct personalities. Already, one calm and steady, the other restless and active, like they were swimming through her dreams. Her assistant popped her head in. "Ms. Bennett, the doctor's office called to confirm your appointment for tomorrow." "Thank you, Amy." Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Every appointment was a reminder of what she was keeping from Alexander, of the choice Nathan's threats had forced her to make. She pulled up the latest sales figures from her team's new campaign, numbers that proved she could succeed without Hayes' technology, without Alexander's empire. Without him, the thought should have been empowering, but instead it left her feeling hollow. Her phone lit up with a text from Olivia. "Have you told him yet?" Claire's response was quick. "You know I can't. Nathan would destroy him. Or maybe, knowing about the twins, would give him something worth fighting for." Claire closed her eyes, remembering the way Alexander had looked at her that night in his dark office, when his walls had finally started to crack. "Some people aren't ready to fight for love," she typed back, "no matter how much we wish they were." What neither Claire nor Alexander knew was that fate was about to force their hands. In a Boston hospital room, Rebecca Carter, Nathan's wife, and Alexander's former fiancée, was waking up from a coma, her first words a warning that would shatter everyone's carefully constructed worlds. "Nathan, he's going to kill him. We have to warn Alexander." The nurse hit the panic button as Rebecca's monitors started screaming, unaware that she'd just set in motion a chain of events that would bring two broken hearts crashing back together. Whether they were ready or not, Alexander stared at his phone in disbelief, reading the message again. "Rebecca's awake. She's asking for you. Come alone. Dr. Morris, Boston General." The last time he'd seen Rebecca, she'd been leaving a courtroom in disgrace. Now, 5 years later, he found himself walking down the sterile hospital corridor, his footsteps echoing against polished floors. A nurse led him to a private room where Rebecca lay, looking smaller and more fragile than he remembered. "Alex." Her voice was weak, but her eyes were clear. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't." He remained standing, keeping his distance. "Why now, Rebecca?" She gestured weakly to the chair beside her bed. "Because I can't carry this guilt any more. Nathan, he's not who you think he is, who I thought he was. I know about the campaign leak, about how he set it up to drive Claire away. It goes deeper than that." Rebecca's hand trembled as she reached for a cup of water. "The embezzlement charges against me? Nathan orchestrated everything. He needed someone to take the fall for his own schemes, and I was convenient." Alexander's world tilted on its axis. "What?" "He'd been stealing from the company for years. Before I came along, when I discovered the truth, he gave me a choice. Take the blame or die in an accident. I chose survival." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I let you believe I betrayed you because the alternative was worse. Why are you telling me this now?" "Because history's repeating itself. Nathan's been watching Claire, collecting information. He's going to use it to destroy you both." Rebecca's monitors beeped faster. "The pregnancy? What pregnancy?" Alexander's voice was sharp. Rebecca's eyes widened. "You don't know. Claire, she's—" The door opened and Nathan Carter walked in, his smile coldly pleasant. "I thought I might find you here." Alexander stood, positioning himself between Nathan and Rebecca's bed. "Security knows I'm here." "No, they don't." Nathan closed the door softly. Amazing what a hospital's IT system will tell you when you have the right access, like when certain visitors check in or when certain patients wake up unexpectedly. Rebecca's heart monitor accelerated. "Nathan, please, quiet, dear." His voice was gentle, but his eyes were hard. "You've said quite enough already." He turned to Alexander. "Walk with me. We need to discuss your future." "I'm not going anywhere with you." Nathan pulled out his phone, showing a photo that made Alexander's blood run cold. Claire, walking into a Chicago medical building, her pregnant belly clearly visible beneath a winter coat. "Those are your children she's carrying," Nathan said softly. "Twins, I believe. Would be a shame if something happened to them, wouldn't it? All that stress during pregnancy can be so dangerous." Alexander's fists clenched. If you go near her, you'll what? Call the police? Tell them your ex-business partner is threatening the woman carrying your secret babies? The same woman who mysteriously left town after a corporate espionage scandal. Nathan's smile widened. No, here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign over controlling interest in Hayes Technology to me. A gesture of goodwill between old friends. Why? Alexander's voice was raw. Why destroy everything I've built? Because you took everything from me. Nathan's composure cracked. When you chose the company over Rebecca, when you let her take the fall, you proved what really mattered. Do you? Now it's my turn to take what matters most. I never chose. Alexander stopped, realization dawning. You loved her. Before she was ever with me, you loved her. And I protected her better than you ever did. Nathan glanced at Rebecca's bed, even if she never understood why. The monitors suddenly screamed as Rebecca convulsed, her body arching. Off the bed, Nathan moved faster than Alexander expected, shoving past him toward the door. Choose wisely, old friend, he called back. You have until tomorrow to sign the papers, or Claire gets a visit from some very unfriendly investors. I hear Chicago's lovely this time of year. Medical staff rushed in as Rebecca flatlined, pushing Alexander aside. Through the chaos, he could only think of Claire carrying his children, facing danger she didn't even know existed. His phone felt heavy in his pocket. One call could warn her, protect her, but Nathan would be watching. One wrong move, and Alexander's hand tightened around his phone as Rebecca's monitors continued their desperate song. He had until tomorrow to figure out how to save everything he loved. His company, his children, and the woman who had finally taught him the true cost of keeping his heart behind walls. In Chicago, Claire woke from an uneasy sleep, her hands protectively cradling her stomach. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't place it. Outside her window, a dark car idled in the snow, its occupants watching, waiting for Nathan's signal to act. The pieces were in place, the game was in motion, and time was running out. Alexander Hayes had built his empire on rules, but now he was about to break every single one of them. His private jet cut through the night sky toward Chicago, while below, his carefully constructed world crumbled. The emergency board meeting he'd called played over in his mind. I'm stepping down as CEO, effective immediately. The boardroom's shocked silence had been deafening. He'd transferred controlling interest to a blind trust, not to Nathan, but to a structure that would protect the company without giving Nathan direct control. It wasn't what Nathan wanted, but it would buy time he desperately needed. Now, at 30,000 feet, Alexander stared at the latest photo Nathan had sent. Claire entering her Chicago apartment, unaware of the men watching her. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. Nathan right on schedule. You're making a mistake. Nathan's voice was cold. This isn't what we agreed. No, my mistake was letting you manipulate me for years. Alexander's voice was steady, certain. You don't get to hurt anyone else I love. Love? Nathan laughed. The great Alexander Hayes admitting to love? Too bad it's too late. My men are already... Alexander cut him off. Check your email, Nathan. Every piece of evidence Rebecca collected about your embezzlement schemes just went to the SEC. She didn't just wake up with a guilty conscience, she woke up with proof. The silence on the other end was satisfying, but Alexander wasn't done. While you were busy threatening me, I had my team trace every shell company you've used, every offshore account. It's all there, documented and delivered. You're finished. You're bluffing. But Nathan's voice wavered. You can't prove. The proof was in Rebecca's safety deposit box, the one you never knew about. She may have taken the fall for you, but she made sure there was a way back to the truth. Alexander's voice hardened. Now call off your men, or the next email goes to the FBI. The line went dead. Alexander checked his watch. 20 minutes to landing. He pulled up the security feed from Claire's building that his team had hacked, into watching as two men in a black sedan argued over their phones, then finally drove away. But he couldn't relax yet. Nathan was cornered, and cornered men were dangerous. In her apartment, Claire sat on her couch, one hand resting on her swollen belly as she reviewed work documents. The twins were active tonight, their movements a constant reminder of the secrets she carried. A knock at her door made her pause. "Miss Bennett," a woman's voice called out. "Chicago PD. We need to speak with you about a security concern." Claire approached the door cautiously. "Can I see some identification?" Through the peephole, she saw a badge held up. Something felt wrong, but before she could process why, her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Don't open the door. Not police. Hide." Her heart pounding, Claire backed away silently. The twins kicked harder, as if sensing her fear. She moved toward her bedroom, looking for somewhere to hide, when she heard the distinctive sound of a key in her lock. The door opened, revealing a woman in a police uniform and a man in a dark suit. "Miss Bennett," the woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Carter sends his regards." "Stay back," Claire warned, grabbing a vase from her side table. "I've already called the real police." "No, you haven't," the man said, advancing slowly. "But don't worry, we just need you to come with us for a little while, until Mr. Carter resolves some business matters." Claire's back hit the bedroom door. The twins kicked again, and she felt a surge of protective fury. These people threatened, not just her, but her children, Alexander's children. Her hand found the doorknob behind her. "That's not going to happen," she said, and threw the vase. The crash created just enough distraction. Claire darted into her bedroom, slamming and locking the door. She could hear them pursuing, their footsteps heavy on her hardwood floors. Her hands shook as she tried to open her window, but 7 months pregnant made escape to the fire escape a dangerous proposition. The bedroom door shuddered under impact. Claire looked around desperately for a weapon, anything to protect herself. And her babies. The door cracked, wood splintering around the lock, and then, from the living room, a new voice cut through the chaos. "Get away from that door, or I start shooting." Claire's heart stopped. She knew that voice. "Mr. Carter said," the fake officer began. "Mr. Carter is currently in FBI custody." Alexander's voice was cold steel. "Along with every piece of evidence needed to bury him. Now step away from the door, or I add attempted kidnapping to the charges. Your choice." Footsteps retreated. Claire heard the sound of zip ties being tightened, professional voices speaking into radios. Only when Alexander called out, "Claire, it's safe, you can come out," did she finally unlock the door. He stood in her living room, the fake officers now secured and surrounded by actual FBI agents. But Claire barely noticed them. All she could see was Alexander, looking at her with a mixture of love, fear, and awe as his eyes took in her pregnant belly. "You're here," she whispered. "I'm here." He took a step toward her, then stopped, uncertainty crossing his face. "Claire, The rest of his words were lost as Claire's knees buckled. Alexander moved faster than thought, catching her before she could fall. One hand splayed protectively over her stomach, and he felt it, the strong kick of one of their children. His eyes met hers, full of questions and wonder and regret. "We need to talk," Claire said softly. Around them, FBI agents efficiently processed the scene. Outside, Nathan Carter was being led into a federal building in handcuffs. And somewhere, in Boston, Rebecca smiled in her hospital bed, finally at peace with her part in the story. But in that Chicago apartment, time stopped for two people who had found their way back to each other, drawn together by the strongest force of all, the love they'd both tried so hard to deny. After the FBI agents left, silence settled over Claire's apartment like fresh snow. She sat on her couch, one hand absently rubbing her stomach, while Alexander stood by the window, his silhouette outlined against Chicago's nighttime skyline. The distance between them felt both vast and microscopic. "Twins," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "We're having twins." "Yes." Claire watched his reflection in the window. "A boy and a girl. I found out last week." Alexander turned, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Nathan threatened to destroy you if I did." She laughed softly, but there was pain in it. "Though I suppose that wasn't the only reason. I wasn't sure you'd want us, Claire." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, kneeling before her. His hand hovered over her stomach, asking permission. When she nodded, he placed it gently against the swell of their children. Almost immediately, one of the twins kicked against his palm. "They know their father," Claire whispered. Alexander's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I've missed so much already. The first ultrasound, the first kicks. You're here now." She covered his hand with hers. "But Alexander, I need to know. Why are you really here? Is it just because of the babies?" He met her gaze steadily. "I gave up control of Hayes Technology today." "What?" Claire sat up straighter. "But the company is everything to you." "No." Alexander's voice was firm. "You are everything to me. You and these babies, the company, the money, the power, none of it matters if I lose you. I learned that the day you walked away, I just wasn't brave enough to admit it. What changed?" "I did." He shifted to sit beside her on the couch, keeping their hands linked over their children. "When Rebecca told me about Nathan's threats, about you being pregnant, I finally understood what real fear feels like. Not the fear of being vulnerable or getting hurt, but the terror of losing someone you love because you were too afraid to fight for them." Claire's free hand came up to touch his face, feeling the slight tremor in his jaw. "You're shaking." "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Not of loving you. I think I've loved you since that first meeting in my office. I'm terrified of failing you again, of not being the man you and our children deserve." The Alexander Hayes I first met would never have admitted to being scared," Claire observed. "The Alexander Hayes you first met was a fool who thought love was weakness." He turned his head to kiss her palm. "You changed that. You changed everything." A particularly strong kick from one of the twins made them both smile. "That's your daughter," Claire said. "She's the active one. Your son is calmer, like he's already planning his next move." "Just like their mother and father," Alexander mused, then grew serious. "Claire, I know I have no right to ask this, but come back to Boston with me. Not for the company, I meant what I said about stepping down, but because I want to build a life with you. A real life without walls or rules or fear." Claire studied his face, seeing the truth of his transformation in every line and shadow. "I can't just uproot my life again. I have a job here, responsibilities." "I know." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'll move to Chicago. I'll commute. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that this time is different, that I'm different." "And what about your trust issues, your need for control? Those don't just disappear overnight." "No, they don't," he agreed, "but I'm willing to work on them. Therapy, couples counseling, whatever we need. I want to be better, Claire, for you, for our children, for myself." A memory surfaced, that rainy night in his office when she'd asked what he was afraid of. Now, months later, he was finally answering with complete honesty. "I can't promise it will be easy," she said softly. "I don't want easy." Alexander's thumb traced circles on her stomach. "I want real. I want messy and complicated and absolutely worth it. I want morning sickness and midnight cravings and 2 a.m. feedings. I want to hold your hand through delivery and cry when I first see our children. I want to argue about paint colors for the nursery and whose turn it is to change diapers. I want everything, Claire, with you." Tears spilled down Claire's cheeks. When did you become so good with words? I had an excellent creative director once, he smiled, wiping away her tears. She taught me that the most powerful messages come from the heart. The twins kicked again, as if voting on their father's speech. Claire laughed through her tears, the sound full of hope and healing. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay? Okay, we can try. Together." She squeezed his hand. "But Alexander, if you ever shut me out again, I won't." He pulled her close, careful of her belly. "No more walls, no more rules, just us finding our way together." Outside, Chicago's lights twinkled like stars, witnesses to a new beginning. In Claire's bedroom, the ultrasound photo of their twins lay on her nightstand, a boy and a girl, already reaching for each other across the divide of her womb, teaching their parents the most important lesson of all. Love isn't weakness. It's the strength to break down walls, to risk everything, to choose trust over fear. Again and again and again. "I still think the elephant theme is too obvious," Claire said, watching Alexander assemble a crib in what would soon be the twins' nursery. 2 months had passed since their reconciliation, and their lives had merged in ways both challenging and beautiful. "The elephant's a classic," Alexander argued, frowning at the instruction manual. He'd insisted on building the furniture himself, refusing to hire professionals. Besides, they represent family, wisdom, and protection. "And here I thought you just liked the color scheme." Claire smiled, resting her hands on her 8-month belly. The twins were especially active today, as if sensing the approaching deadline. Alexander set down his screwdriver and moved to sit beside her in the cushioned rocking chair. "I may have done some research on symbolism in nursery decor." His hand joined hers on her stomach. "How are they today?" "Your daughter's practicing her gymnastics routine. Your son's more interested in using my ribs as a punching bag." She leaned into his touch. "Dr. Rodriguez says they're right on schedule for the C-section next month." A shadow crossed Alexander's face at the mention of the scheduled delivery. The complications they'd discovered last week had made a C-section necessary, and though he tried to hide it, Claire could see how the medical risks terrified him. "Hey," she caught his hand. "We're going to be fine, all 4 of us." "I know," but his voice was tight. I can't lose you, Claire. Any of you." "And you won't." She guided his face to meet her gaze. "But this worry, this fear I'm carrying, we need to talk about it. That was our agreement, remember? No more walls." Alexander was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing circles on her belly. "I've been having nightmares," he admitted finally, "about the delivery, about something going wrong and having to choose between me and the babies." When he nodded, Claire's heart ached for him. "That's not a choice you'll have to make. Dr. Rodriguez is the best in Chicago. The whole team knows exactly what they're doing. I know that logically." Alexander's voice was rough. "But logic doesn't help at 3 a.m. when I wake up terrified. I've never had so much to lose." Claire shifted in the chair to face him better. "You're not the only one who's scared, but being scared together is better than being scared alone, isn't it?" A small smile touched his lips. "When did you get so wise?" "Probably around the time you got so emotional," she teased. The great Alexander Hayes, brought to his knees by nursery furniture and baby clothes. Speaking of which, he stood and went to the closet, returning with a small gift bag. "I got something today." Claire reached into the bag and pulled out 2 tiny business suits, one in pale pink and one in powder blue. Each had a miniature Hayes Technology logo embroidered on the pocket. She burst out laughing. "Really? Corporate onesies? They need to look professional for board meetings," he said with mock seriousness. "I thought you stepped down as CEO." Temporarily, Alexander sat back down, pulling her feet into his lap to massage them, a nightly ritual he'd insisted on since moving to Chicago. "The board asked me to return once everything with Nathan is settled, but this time will be different. No more 60-hour weeks, no more missed dinners, family comes first. And if there's another crisis, another campaign leak or corporate emergency, then we handle it together. His hands worked the tension from her swollen ankles. I've learned my lesson about shutting people out. Besides, I hear my wife is an excellent creative director. Claire's heart skipped at the word wife. They hadn't discussed marriage, both, agreeing to focus on the twins' arrival first, but hearing him say it so casually, so certainly. Was that a proposal, Mr. Hayes? Not yet. He smiled mysteriously. When I propose, you'll know it. But first, he was interrupted by a sharp kick that they both felt. I think your daughter's objecting to my timing. Our daughter, Claire corrected. And she gets that dramatic flair from you. Pretty sure the stubbornness is all you. His phone buzzed, and Claire saw him tense before checking it. Nathan? She asked softly. No. His sentencing is next week. But my lawyers are handling it. Alexander showed her the screen. It was a text from Rebecca. She's being released from the hospital tomorrow. The doctors say she's made a full recovery. Are you going to see her? Alexander was quiet for a moment. I think I need to. For closure, if nothing else. Would you come with me? The request, so simple yet so profound, brought tears to Claire's eyes. 2 months ago, he would have handled it alone, kept his feelings locked away. Now he was asking her to share even this difficult moment. Of course I will. She squeezed his hand. As long as you promise to protect me if she throws something at the pregnant lady who stole her ex-fiancé. His laugh was warm and real. I think she'll be happy for us, actually. Her last text said something about Karma finally getting it right. They sat together in comfortable silence, surrounded by half-built furniture and tiny clothes. The afternoon sun painting patterns on the elephant-themed walls. Claire felt the twins shift and settle, as if they too were content in this moment of peace. But peace, she knew, was often the calm before the storm. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a quiet voice whispered that their greatest test was still to come. She pushed the thought away, focusing instead on Alexander's hands, strong and sure as they soothed her tired body. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. No more walls, no more rules, just love in all its messy, complicated, beautiful truth. Something's wrong. Claire's words shattered the pre-dawn quiet of their bedroom. Cutting through Alexander's sleep like a blade. He was instantly awake, reaching for her in the darkness. The babies? Contractions. Claire's voice was tight with pain. Too early. Too strong. Alexander was already dialing Dr. Rodriguez's emergency number, his other hand finding Claire's in the dark. The twins weren't due for another 2 weeks. The C-section was scheduled. Everything was planned. But their children, it seemed, had other ideas. The next hours passed in a blur of ambulance lights and hospital corridors. Words like preeclampsia and fetal distress echoed in Alexander's head as they rushed Claire into emergency surgery. The last thing she said before the anesthesia took hold was, "Don't leave them. No matter what happens, stay with our babies." "I'm not leaving any of you," he promised, but she was already unconscious. Now he stood in the surgical waiting room, pressing his forehead against the cold window as snow fell over Chicago. Rebecca's hand rested supportively on his shoulder. She'd come as soon as he'd called, understanding better than anyone what it meant to face losing everything you loved. "She's strong," Rebecca said softly. "Stronger than I ever was." She shouldn't have to be strong right now. Alexander's voice was raw. She should be safe, happy, planning the nursery colors and arguing about baby names, not fighting for her life because you what? Rebecca turned him to face her. Because you loved her? Because you finally let someone in? Because I didn't see the warning signs, the headaches, the swelling. I should have insisted we come in sooner. Alexander Hayes, Rebecca's voice was firm. Stop trying to control things you can't control. That's what ruined us, remember? Your need to manage every variable, to prevent every possible hurt. But love doesn't work that way. Before he could respond, the surgical doors opened. Doctor Rodriguez emerged, still in her scrubs, and Alexander's heart stopped. Congratulations, she said with a tired smile. You have a beautiful, healthy son and daughter. Claire is in recovery. The surgery was complicated. We almost lost her. But she pulled through. She's asking for you. Alexander's legs nearly gave out. Rebecca steadied him, pushing him toward the doors. Go, meet your family. He found Claire in the recovery room, pale but alive, their newborn twins sleeping. In clear bassinets beside her bed, she opened her eyes as he approached, managing a weak smile. I hear we have some rule breakers, she whispered. Alexander laughed through his tears, carefully gathering her hand in his. They get that from their mother. Have you held them yet? I was waiting for you. Together, they looked at their children for the first time. Their daughter, true to form, was wiggling energetically despite being swaddled. Their son watched them with calm curiosity, his tiny fingers curled into fists. They need names, Claire said softly. Alexander touched his daughter's cheek gently. What about Hope? Because she reminds me to never lose it. Hope, Claire agreed, and for our son, William. It means strong-willed protector. Hope and William Hayes. Alexander's voice caught. Perfect, like their mother. Not perfect, Claire corrected. Real, which is better. A nurse came in to help Claire feed the twins for the first time. Alexander watched in awe as his children instinctively knew what to do, their small hands clutching at their mother as they nursed. I have something for you, he said when they were alone again. From his pocket, he pulled out a small box. I was going to wait, do something elaborate, but seeing you with them, seeing how close I came to losing you, I don't want to wait anymore. Inside the box was a ring, elegantly simple. But it wasn't the diamond that made Claire's eyes fill. With tears, it was the inscription inside. Love's greatest rule is having none. Marry me, Alexander said softly. Not because of the twins or because it's expected, but because you taught me that real love isn't about control or walls or safety. It's about choosing each other every day through all the messy, beautiful, terrifying parts of life. Yes, Claire whispered, 1,000 times yes. As if on cue, Hope began to cry, followed quickly by William. Alexander lifted his daughter while Claire soothed their son, and in that moment of perfect chaos, he finally understood the truth that had eluded him for so long. Love wasn't a weakness to be controlled or a rule to be followed. It was this: the quiet strength of Claire's smile, the warm weight of his daughter in his arms, the fierce protectiveness he felt watching his son's tiny chest rise and fall. It was midnight, feedings and morning kisses, arguments about elephant-themed nurseries and corporate onesies. It was the courage to be vulnerable, the wisdom to let go, and the faith to believe that some things were worth risking everything for. Outside, the snow continued to fall, coating Chicago in pristine white. But inside that hospital room, surrounded by the warm cocoon of their new family, Alexander and Claire had found something better than perfection. They had found their truth, and in the end, that was the greatest rule of all. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.